Hi everyone, wherever you are. I hope you're having a wonderful week so far. We're here with the latest episode of the Inside Crypto Show, interviews and discussions with regular people just like yourselves. Today we are joined by Nathan Snell, the CEO and co-founder of Raleon, a Web3 marketing platform empowering brands, games, and dApps to engage and retain users using on and off-chain data. With a background as a serial entrepreneur in the financial services sector, Nathan co-founded nCino. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, scaling the cloud-based banking software company to IPO at a $4 billion valuation before venturing into Web3. Before we dive into it, Nathan, we've got lots to talk about, background and what you're currently doing. Tell us about yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, first, just appreciate being on the show, listen to a good number of episodes, and it's always just great to hear what other founders are doing in the space. So just wanted to start off saying thanks. I guess in terms of a little bit about myself, as you said, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I actually started off really in the e-commerce and marketing sort of tech space early on in my career. And from there, shifted over into the world of financial services or fintech, where, as you mentioned, I founded a company called nCino. nCino, for those that may not know, is a bank operating system. So financial institutions globally use nCino to originate commercial or consumer loans, open accounts, among a variety of other things. It's the sort of de facto or standard in this space. And that was an exciting ride. We started about, around 5 people in 2012. We took it public in 2020 to 7 billion valuation. That was an amazing experience. I left when we were about 1,600 people across the globe with offices everywhere, really at the beginning of 2022 to take a break, and then ultimately started Raleon with my co-founder and CTO, Adam, who actually, he and I worked together previously at nCino. So that's the quick version of my background there.
That's awesome. You took a break, right? And did something in that break lead you to Web3 and blockchain and crypto? Or was that something that you're always interested in going back to, I guess, 2012 would be like the first days of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I did, or I would say it's something that I've always followed. I did actually have in 2012, I had a couple Bitcoin. I do not anymore. So it was actually one of those things where at the time I literally got it to purchase a Domino's pizza. There was like some promotion that was going on. So it was around like that time period, but it's lost in some wallet, unfortunately, somewhere, and that I can never recover because it's the blessing and the curse of having your own keys. But yeah, so while I was at nCino, with it being very fintech focused, part of my role on the back half of my time there was continuing to evaluate sort of new technologies and seeing what were new and innovative things. How could we bring that into the bank operating system? And obviously blockchain was continuing to emerge. And really, I'd say I started to take notice around the time of Ethereum when the idea of smart contracts and dApps and things like that were beginning to emerge. So I'd been following it for a while. And then ultimately, really in 2022, with some time off, I felt like I really had a good chance to just dig in. I'm very much I have to touch and feel it myself kind of person. So I was able to dig in. I'm not much of an engineer, but I was able to play around with Rust, really, I guess, like almost play with some of the different DeFi protocols. What's it like to be an LP and things like that. And honestly, through doing that, and really even leading up to 2022, so the back half of 21, just fell in love more and more with just the concepts and just different innovations that were there. I was a part of a few airdrops, which was super exciting, and just even an interesting thing of like the airdrop, and you get to be part of governance for things. So there's a lot of cool things that ultimately led up to thinking about and really seeing different opportunities in the space that we looked at pursuing.
That sounds good. You mentioned airdrops, you mentioned participation, and I guess this sort of ties into what we're going to talk about later. So tell us about Raleon, because I looked up the website, of course, and checked out some of your own stuff in nCino, and it seems like such a departure from nCino. And why is that? And maybe first, why the departure, and then what is Raleon doing?
Yeah, I get that question often because it does seem, at surface level, it does seem like a big departure. But I would say 2 things with it. One is being a serial entrepreneur. I'd say I didn't land in fintech going, oh my gosh, I want to be in fintech. That's just what I want to do. To me, what's interesting, right, is ultimately just areas of opportunity. And that's part of what nCino came out of, was just seeing a big opportunity in the financial services sector. And honestly, that's part of what Raleon came out of as well. But the other part of it too is it's not as clear, but when you look at nCino is actually largely built on top of Salesforce. So I really spent more than a decade operating on and building tech on top of AWS and on top of the world's best marketing platform. So, I'd say I've got a really deep actual background in MarTech in addition to FinTech and things like that. So when we started to explore the Web3 space and talk to a number of different projects at the time, we kept hearing the same things over and over, which is ultimately things like, oh, I don't know how to engage my users. I don't understand who my users are. I can't connect marketing activity to business results. And coming from that MarTech and really scaling side, To me, it was like, oh, like this is clearly a MarTech problem. So that's kind of some of how that blend actually comes together, where at surface level, to your point, it's like, why is a fintech guy doing MarTech? But in actuality, it's really a much deeper blend of that.
So you mentioned a lot of, and me originally coming at this when I joined, I guess my first real crypto job as a community manager and engaging with users and talking to people. And I think I can definitely echo that sentiment. I often get asked by other community managers from different projects and groups, okay, how do I engage my users? And you're in it, right? You're providing solutions. What's the fundamental problem that not just like projects, but like large crypto companies are dealing with that they're unable to engage with users?
So it's funny. I think a lot of folks get hung up on this idea of because you have a wallet and because as a result, you're fairly anonymous, right? Not completely, but pretty anonymous. It makes it so things like email aren't available and things of that sort. So I think it creates this sort of impression, to your point, of, oh, like we really can't engage with users. And to be honest, before tech, it was very difficult. Usually what people would end up leaning towards is, okay, maybe using something like Collabland, I can associate a Discord to a wallet address. And as a result, like I can stitch together something that lets me connect with them purely on Discord. But when we looked at the landscape when we were starting Raleon, what we saw oftentimes is if you went to a dApp, for example, you wouldn't really see any of the kind of things that you would expect if you were a Web2 company to happen, right? So you wouldn't see any kind of intervention, as it would be called in marketing speak, where a side pop would happen, or you'd get a specialized message, or even having content personalization or things like that. So our view was very much one of like ads and things like that are fairly simplistic, right? It's easy to drive traffic. You load money in and people come to the site or they join a Discord or what have you. But when it comes to actually converting those users and keeping them, there wasn't really anything that was available. So that's where sort of our view is, if we can help dApps really turn their dApp, or projects, I should say, turn their dApp into their number one revenue channel, right? Or their site into their number one revenue channel by way of giving them these engagement tools, then suddenly we're in a very different scenario, right? We're in a scenario where growth becomes easy. And then to your point, the ability to engage with the user actually becomes pretty standard, and it becomes something very possible, regardless of whether they have a wallet or an email or anything like that. So I'd say that's where I think historically that's been the case. I think what we're seeing more and more is between technology like Raleon or Coinbase Wallet and their new messaging and things like that, we're seeing a lot more emerge to help solve that problem pretty successfully.
Okay, Nathan, I'm like listening to this podcast or watching the video and I'm like, okay, cool. This is interesting. How did they get started with Raleon? How, from a project perspective or even a user perspective?
Yeah, so it's very easy. You can go to our site, you can request access. We'll actually be opening it up to a much broader audience in a self-serve way fully in a couple of weeks here. But really, you can go to the site, you take a snippet, you drop it into your dApp, and from there, you're off to the races, honestly. So
nice.
We can start, once that snippet's in place, we begin understanding who users are. You can launch what we call action prompts. You can launch what we call embedded quests. And it all becomes just a part of your site. It's all no code. So it's really easy to get started. I'd say most folks are up and running in 5-10 minutes.
That is impressive. There's no excuse for anyone not to be able to give it a try. Yeah. So like, how are you finding, what's the feeling like? Because you guys mentioned gamification on the site, right? And the questions, I'm like, okay, yes, I remember Duolingo and other things that have gamified stuff. Or even when I go out for a bike ride here in Taiwan and they give you like little icons. Yes. Oh, you hit 100 kilometers or 100 miles, something on your bike. Well done. Yay. But I find like, it might be an age thing because I am 40 and I'm like, okay, thank you. Yes, but actually I don't really care. So what's the reception been like for these customized messages for the things that you're doing at Raleon?
It's actually been really good. I'd say we haven't seen anything engagement wise. It's been less than 20%, for example. That's on the action prompt side. On the embedded quest side, we've seen it as high as 80-90% at times in terms of completion and engagement and everything. It tends to be really good from what we've seen. A few factors. One is, gamification, and Duolingo is a great point, right? Where it's like, the more that you end up seeing the same gamification in place, some of that wanes, right? So some of it's, right, we're early. So as a result, any project that's doing this kind of stuff, it's just very new and very different. So the result is that you're going to get much better engagement. I also think things like personalization, you don't have to gamify something for personalization to be really effective. And that's some of the campaigns we've seen projects do, is there isn't necessarily much in the way of gamification, but it's just very personalized. You've used Uniswap a lot, you show up, there's this very targeted message to you as somebody who's used Uniswap. But it's in very much this privacy friendly way, right? It's more a matter of, hey, like we're aware that you've used this, so we're not going to run you through like, the DeFi dummy onboarding because you've been doing something already, right? So we're going to jump you straight into what you care about. So that kind of personalization just lends itself to being able to have a much better engagement overall, which is, again, a lot of what our platform really allows. So you can convert those users and bring them back for reasons that they really care about.
That's impressive. Honestly, you just touched on a kind of a sore point for me is I hate going to multiple sites and then I'm like, oh, do you not know how to do this? Let me teach you. Here, open up another window here. And this is what this does. This does. I'm like, please skip. I don't want to see that again. So is that like the hidden case for Raleon? Because that's one thing I didn't notice on the website is looking through all this stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, personalization would be awesome. Is there an ideal site for this? Are you aiming for DEXs? Are you aiming for Web3 gaming sites? What's your ideal audience, at least for the moment?
Yeah, what you described. So DeFi is a big space for us. DEXs in particular, we've got a lot of different customers that are DEXs just because it lends itself to that kind of activity very well. But yeah, DEXs, DeFi, depending on if you classify them in the same category, and games tend to be the three core areas that we focus on and I'd say see really good results in.
Okay.
We've done some experiments in some other areas and are working with some customers and projects outside of that. But that's where we've seen the best results so far, and we're tuning on the other areas.
Nice. That's awesome. And that's exciting. I can't wait for more personalized experiences because honestly, like the current state of experiences sucks sometimes.
That's true.
Yes. So with Raleon, like one of the trends, like our research team has been talking about is the idea of account abstraction and eventually doing away with private keys and seed phrases and that sort of stuff. And is that something you're drifting away from crypto terminology towards something more Web 2-esque or Web 2 friendly?
So for us, and this is probably just a bias coming from Web 2, we've always viewed like the holy grail of personalization from a Web3 standpoint being a combination of the two data sets. So what we run under the hood to power a lot of this is actually what we'd call like a Web3 customer data platform. We take all sort of the Web2 site activities. So for example, you go to a DEX, you connect your wallet, you look at a few different quotes, you explore the FAQ, like all that sort of what's called instrumentation data we pull in. And that, again, in a very privacy friendly way. So we're not capturing IPs or things like that. So we pull that in. And then we combine it ultimately with the on-chain data. So as a result, what you actually get is this really rich perspective of the user behaviors in this anonymous way, but in a way that actually lets you understand what's this person trying to do? What are they interested in? How can we actually guide them in the right ways? Because ultimately, this sort of engagement activity, I think marketing sometimes has a negative connotation in Web3, whereas what we're really trying to do is guide users to the right things, trying to make it feel like a personalized experience so they can understand. And to your point, if you've been to 1inch and Uniswap and Sushi and what have you, and you're exploring something new, like you don't need the product tour for the 14th time about how, about what an LP is, right? If you've been an LP on Uniswap, just let me jump in and do the things that I want to do. And that's a lot of what we're able to enable by both understanding the on-chain side and multiple wallets across that. So we have algorithms that actually let us identify, these three wallets are likely the same person in conjunction with the actual product activity that are going on.
And I remember part of the intro was on-chain and off-chain data at Raleon. So what sort of off-chain data are you looking at?
Yeah, so it's largely that product analytics. We can pull in data from a marketing standpoint too, in terms of like how people are actually coming to the site. But by and large, it's that product analytics. So, what we see as a result, if you think about the user flow, is we can understand things, or our customers can understand things like how trustworthy do people view the site or view a dApp. So if they come and they hit your landing page and they look around a little bit and they never connect their wallet, then you probably have some trust issues on the site, right? Versus if everybody hits the wallet, hits and connects the wallet, but then they don't ultimately convert on chain, then again, you might have some conversion issues. And that's again the idea of it's easy to drive the traffic. It's much harder to go and actually take that traffic, get them to connect the wallet, and then actually do something on chain afterwards.
I've seen not a lot, like some sites have Gmail logins and Facebook logins for Web3 crypto. Do you see a point in the future, maybe now, where you're like, okay, you're no longer wallet address, your name is Tom Jones, you're from Denmark, you're 46 years old, you get all that Facebook API data and you're building customer profiles for your clients that way?
That's a really good question. It's funny, I'd say we've talked about this topic a lot at Raleon. And because one thing that comes up often, for instance, is being able to like reverse engineer somebody's Twitter handle based on their ENS, for example. And that's something that we've had customers ask for. And honestly, we've taken the path of if somebody hasn't volunteered that information, then we're not going to use it. And I think to me, it's a very similar situation of if somebody's willing to connect the wallet or sign in a particular way and is willing to volunteer that information to a particular dApp, then I think they've given that permission expressly, in which case it should be used. For us, everything is multi-tenant and everything else. So we view it very much in that kind of narrowed space of, great, if they volunteered it, like a Discord handle would be a more sort of immediate example. But if you volunteered your Discord handle to this particular dApp via, say, an embedded quest that's running on your site via Raleon, then you're giving that a little bit of that consent to say, hey, I've connected these two things. I would expect you to possibly reach out to me via that. So I'd say that tends to be how we think about it. I do think, even as we look at the data, email's just not going anywhere. I put a tweet out a couple of days ago based on a bunch of experiments we ran through July. And compared to Telegram, Twitter, Discord for highly targeted messages, very personalized messages, email still converted 5 times better than any other format. It's just the winner. It's just what we use.
That's true. That is true. I find I used to be a teacher like 2 jobs ago for 10 years. And I would say maybe our generation or 30 to 40 still use email, but man, that is younger generation. Email is just, what are you talking about? I'm using Line or I'm on Discord with my friends or something like that. Going back to your point, right? You made some really good points. My partner's not on social media. She's totally against it. She's an anonymous person, has 5 different cell phones for family and for spam calls and all that stuff. Really,
it's awesome.
Out there. But at the same time, though, you mentioned I consent, giving consent to platforms to say, hey, yes, my name is Korean. You can track me on Instagram. I gotta say, I love that customization. I love scrolling through Instagram and saying, oh, by the way, Korean, you can buy these cinnamon rolls from Taipei in Taiwan because I don't get good cinnamon rolls here where I live in the south of Taiwan. Or you can buy this boxed up burritos again, because I live in a food desert here. It sucks for Western food anyway. But so, yeah, I think that's really interesting. And like you said, if you are volunteering that information, I personally, again, just my opinion, because I know a lot of crypto people, oh my God, decentralized, privacy, etc. But I'm thinking, yeah, I don't mind giving my information to somebody if it does help with the personalized experiences. And talking about your users and people who are using Raleon, not from a project perspective, but people, I guess, indirectly using Raleon, has there been any feedback about, oh my God, no, we just want on-chain data only, no off-chain data?
Not generally. And I think that's largely because it's just, there's such a wealth of information there. And when it comes to really understanding your users, because if you're not using email and things like that, all you have is a wallet just carries so much. So it's we've had folks that have said, hey, if you're going to reverse engineer somebody's Twitter handle, I want to be able to turn that feature off because we believe that's violating our users' privacy. So especially as we work with DeFi projects, we've had some of those conversations of what are we tracking exactly on chain. I'd say it's almost more that of, do we track IP? Are we tracking devices? And we don't track any of that stuff very much intentionally. So I'd say it tends to be more that way. The on-chain side, because it is anonymous, and it tends to be almost more of it's we get to flip the lights on for everybody, right? Where they go, okay, great. Maybe I've got 4,000 active users every month, but I don't know anything about them. But being able to flip the switch with Raleon and go, oh, these users are using these other exchanges. They're trading NFTs very often, or maybe they're not. Maybe they don't do anything with NFTs minus a very small area, in which case they know, no, don't go and partner with those projects because you're not probably going to find the right users and things like that. So it tends to be pretty favorable on the on-chain side.
One of the questions I wanted to ask as well was I'm glad we got introduced because I was looking through your background and looking through the set. I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. And this is a core problem that at the time of recording, crypto might be down significantly due to a lot of macroeconomic issues, but the communities aren't going away. And it's definitely an ever-present issue. And I think it's only going to continue. I'm like, are there other platforms like Raleon? Because I couldn't think of any in the last 5-6 years now in crypto. But if there are any, how are you mainly looking to differentiate yourself from other Web3 engagement platforms?
Yeah. So on the Web3 side, you mentioned community. There are some community automation platforms out there that do a really nice job. For us, we don't really have much in the way of close competitors. And again, I think it's because for us, we really aim to differentiate and hone in on 3 areas. One is the in-app marketing side that I mentioned before, the in-app marketing automation. So that idea of, if you're doing things in Discord, that's awesome. We can help inform and facilitate some of that. But really, you want to drive people to your dApp to trade or borrow or lend or whatever the different things may be. So for us, it's really, again, focused on how do we help a dApp become that number one growth tool. So that way you can really optimize the ad spend that you're doing or the community activity that you're doing and things like that. For us, that in-app marketing automation is big. The detailed analytics that I mentioned ends up being very valuable. And for us, the sort of emphasis there is data is great, but actions are better. So it's like the language we use internally a lot. And that's because it's one thing to go, oh, okay, cool. I know, say, the average net worth of somebody or whether they purchased an NFT recently, or what other projects they use or what have you. But if you can't immediately take action on that, personalize it, draw it into an embedded quest or do an action prompt or what have you, like the value of that data is pretty well diminished because it's okay. Like I understand my users, but like, again, if I can't engage them, so what? And the last one I think that is unique for us is we really want to help projects, communities, brands crush retention and really grow their loyalty. We just see way too many projects spending a lot of time and effort on acquiring a user. And then to your point on the community time, they then spend very little time or very little effort trying to actually keep them, let alone make them loyal. It's like dump them into Discord and then hope for the best. When in actuality, there's a lot more on the community side that goes into keeping them a great user. So for us, that's kind of that last piece is how do we make sure that there's really great tooling that can be used, like quests, that isn't just to send them to another site, but it's actually keep them in brand, create this great, delightful experience that ultimately delights them, lets them have fun, and then keeps them very much engaged and loyal and so on.
Nice. And that's awesome. And the Quest stuff, for those of you who are like listening to the podcast, you should definitely go check out the Raleon website. They've got some cool graphics and some cool examples of that. And it's fun. I got to say that it's really fun. It's like on par with like tier one apps like Duolingo. Again, my opinion, other people might think something different, but I think it's really well done.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Nathan, you mentioned like the 5 to 10 minutes, like incorporating like the Raleon like code snippet into your site. And I'm wondering, as a developer, as a project owner, I incorporate it into my site, right? And then I'm getting these analytics. I'm sure there's some sort of a fee package involved. But my question is going to be like, okay, are you sort of saying, okay, I'm doing this for you and providing you all this data, all this analytics. That's like my podcast platform in a sense, right?
Yeah.
And then are you creating education around those analytics or having a weekly phone call and saying, hey, Tom.xyz, this is your analytics. This is what you should be doing. This is where you're failing. Is it that sort of relationship, or is this sort of I pay you, you get the information, and how I use the information is totally up to me?
So I'd say it's a little bit of both. You hit on, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we see in the Web3 space today, right? Which is, it's like a double-edged sword, right? Like Web3 is so engineering-centric, which is awesome because you get so much experimentation and innovation and speed and pacing, which is great. But it also means that there's a lot of folks that aren't necessarily familiar with marketing and with the things that you could do and with how to use the data and things of that sort. So there definitely is an aspect of, hey, like you can use this for how you'd like. It is a platform that you use it to your heart's content, if you will, or whatever ideas you'd like. But we're also very engaged. While you can come and sign up, we do have very active onboarding. We have proactive outreach. And our view is, we want to cultivate our customers as the Raleon community. So while we don't have necessarily the sort of public scene community, we do want to cultivate our own sort of private internal community. And as a result, we often get comments like, oh my gosh, we have a customer that called us up and was like, this is the best onboarding I've ever had. And it's like white glove service and so on. And it's because we reach out and say, hey, like, we'll have even kind of review stuff and go, hey, we noticed that this number was going down some. Have you considered launching an action prompt? Here's what you could target and the potential results that you can get. In a lot of cases, they go, oh my gosh, that sounds great. And in some cases, we'll help them set it up and guide them through it. In other cases, they jump to it themselves and get rolling with it and that sort of thing. But it's definitely, we want to be a partner. We don't want to just be a vendor. We want to almost be that sort of guide and friend and partner as opposed to just some product that you use on the side.
Nice. And I think that's definitely required, at least like in the interim, until people get familiar with Web3 and the terminology and the architecture, as you mentioned, very engineering intensive. I saw something last week or 2 weeks ago, I think it was in Forbes or the New York Times, and they were like, okay, the future of crypto and blockchain and Web3 is going to be Asia. And you mentioned nCino later on, like just before you exited, was global, right? So we know what's happening in America. We're not going to rehash that on this podcast. We've talked about it numerous times. We know what's happening in Europe. Do you see yourself maybe transitioning to a place like Tokyo or Seoul, South Korea, or some place where all this Web3 gaming is happening, all that money is being spent, all the legislation is being made or currently exists in some places, right? Or are you like, okay, I'm firmly based in the Western half of the world and this is where I want to be?
I don't think we see it quite as as distinctive. This is where we're based. I think as most Web3 companies, and I'd say we're probably almost a hybrid in a way, but as most startups in today's age have planned out like where they're located, we're remote first. So I think to your question, one of the things that we're very considerate of is the fact that we are in the western half of the US. But as a result, when we think about hiring and staffing the right people and everything else, we think about it less from the standpoint of this is where we're based and more from the standpoint of how do we make sure that we're as close to our customers as possible. In some cases, that's myself and others flying out. So I spent most of July in Europe, for example, being out close to customers, close to other folks we want to get to know. And it's also like hiring in market, right? Hiring people that are in Asia or different places. And honestly, too, it's why we have investors that are actually located in Singapore and places like that that are really important and valuable to us. It's just to make sure that, like I'd say, like our view is we wanted to be global by default. And as a result, we've tried to make sure that our network is very representative of that, but across investors, advisors, and even as we think about hiring, the same mindset.
Nice. And that makes a lot of sense and very clear and concise as well. Nathan, this one last question, right, before we round off today's podcast is, I want to be presumptuous, right? And I want to say, I hope I get to see Raleon on every single Web3 game I'm interested in, or DEX, or other places, helping communities engage and helping keeping people engaged, and Telegram and other places. That's my sort of low-level vision. Like, you being who you are, what's your vision for Raleon for the future? And again, you can share as much or as little as you want.
I think what you described is awesome. We certainly think about it that way. I think dream state, right, is that every project is being able to leverage, every kind of D2C or B2C rather oriented project is able to really leverage Raleon to convert more users, to keep those users, to make them loyal. Because we think about retention and loyalty even a bit differently too, right? It's like driving advocates. So I mean, that's certainly the first part. We also think about it very much as how do we help grow the space? And I think there's a tangible way that we do that by just helping projects inherently grow. But given that sort of my background comes from Web 2, we've become experts, have expertise in Web 3. I often describe it as wanting to build a bridge in both directions. For us, we also think about it as how can we also begin to help brands and equip brands with the kind of technology that helps them become comfortable creating loyalty in different ways, right? And being able to engage users in ways that maybe they are not necessarily as familiar with, or that brings more gamification to them, or more kinds of ownership or things like that. For us, that tends to be the view that we have is, how do we build a great platform present and driving this kind of engagement and turning these sites and dApps into kind of the primary growth tools, especially as today they end up being very underutilized on the Web3 side. But I'd say that's step one. And then ultimately, as the space evolves and it happens so quickly, we'll see how it goes from there.
I'm excited and I'm looking forward to it. Nathan, it's been a pleasure. I know as a new dad, you probably have coffee IVs because that's the only way to stay awake.
Both sides.
Yeah, clicked into both sides. So I want you to get some rest. Before we end up today's show, as I mentioned at the start, here's a last section. Anything your marketing manager said, okay, Nathan, you've got to say this today. Don't forget it. Or anything else you want to end up, like any pearls of wisdom, anything about Web3, crypto, Raleon. Floor's yours. Take as much time as you want, but hopefully not too much time because you should get some rest.
No, and I would just say thanks again. I appreciate being able to be on and just enjoy the conversation. I think the one thing I'd say is, again, if you're a project, whether you're super established like a Uniswap or you're brand new starting out, and you're thinking about how do we do marketing, how do we grow, or how do we keep users, especially in the current sort of market environment, and we reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to talk with you. And again, we don't think about it so much as hey, just sign up for the product. There's honestly a lot of founders I have conversations with, some of which never use the product, but we try to lend wisdom and help them how we can. We always just want to play it forward and help the space grow overall. Appreciate it. You can always visit us at Raleon.io. Welcome to follow me on Twitter. But yeah, I think most of all, just appreciate the time and the conversation.
Perfect. So I will include Raleon's socials as well as yours, Nathan. I saw you on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Are you more active on LinkedIn or Twitter? What is the best place for people to sort of follow you on?
Twitter's probably the best. I'm not very, so it's like to the point of your partner, like I'm not a great social media person. Like I got burned out early on. That was a past company where we actually built a whole social media marketing platform and everything else.
Wow.
I'd say I force myself to be active on social media, but Twitter's the place that you can find me. And that's
Twitter's
sort
the
of
place.
what I enjoy
Okay. I know lots of founders have beyond
It's X
yes,
now. My bad.
Yeah, no, I'm not a big fan of that name, so I'm still going to keep using Twitter.
That's right.
That's another conversation altogether. But no, I hope lots of founders, I know a bunch of previous guests still listen to the podcast, and that has definitely been an issue. So hopefully they take advantage of just having a conversation, because when you were introduced to me, and that's like the downside of text and written document. This is Nathan Snell. This is who he is. This is what he does. I'm like, okay, this is interesting, but you're so much more exciting and fun and a great person to talk to in person.
Appreciate it.
So I hope whoever's watching this video and have made it all the way to the end, and there are some of you, that you take advantage of this opportunity, because at the end of the day, everyone needs advice. I know I need advice.
Same.
For sure. So I appreciate it, Nathan. And hopefully we can catch up in a year or so, or if you're ever down to Taiwan or Singapore, let me know, and we can meet in person. Maybe do a podcast in person. That would be awesome.
That would be awesome. That'd be fun.
Yes. And yeah, thanks again. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you very much.